The woman who would become my wife first showed up at my basement apartment door smelling of rain and desperation. That's not quite right. She first asked me to marry her in that hallway, her knuckles white where she gripped the doorframe, her eyes wide with a terror so profound it seemed to suck all the air out of the narrow space between us. That is how I met my wife. It's not how it ended, of course, but it's how it began. With a lie. A frantic, whispered, life-altering lie. Let me back up. My name is Leo. I'm 34 years old and I'm the building superintendent for the Embers, an old apartment house in a part of the city that's forgotten it's supposed to be fashionable. The building has good bones, as my father would have said. Solid. Trustworthy. It just needs someone to listen to its groans, to patch its wounds, to keep the hot water running when the ancient boiler decides to throw a tantrum. That someone was me. For 10 years, I had been the ghost in the machine of that building. I lived in the basement, a small, clean apartment that was more workshop than home. My life was a quiet rhythm of circuits and plumbing, of plaster and paint. I was the man people called when things broke. A leaky faucet, a flickering light, a jammed lock. I was good at it. I was good at fixing things that were not alive. Because with things you could always find the break. You could trace the wiring back to the fault, find the crack in the pipe, identify the stripped gear. People were different. I had stopped trying to fix people a long time ago. I had stopped trying to fix myself. 10 years ago, I had been a different person. Person who wanted things. Person who had plans. A person whose father was still alive. We were on a job site, a new high-rise downtown. He was the foreman. I was his apprentice, learning the trade, learning how to build things that would outlast me. He was up on the steel 4th floor calling down instructions. I was on the ground, checking a supply manifest. There was a sound. A sickening groan of metal, a shout cut short. I looked up just in time to see the world end. After that, something inside me just switched off. The part that wants, the part that hopes, the part that connects. It went dark. I left the construction trade. I couldn't stand on a job site without seeing shadows fall from the sky. So I came here to the Embers where everything was already old, where the breaks were predictable and the fixes were quiet. I became a ghost. I kept to myself. I did my job. I watched the lives of the tenants unfold in brief, disconnected scenes. The young couple in 3B who fought and made up. The old woman in 2A who had too many cats. The musician in 4C who practiced scales at all hours. They were just noises, just work orders, just names on a rent roll. I was alone. Not lonely. There's a difference. Loneliness is an ache, a wanting. I had stopped wanting anything. Being alone was just a state of being, like being right-handed or 6 feet tall. It was a fact. My father had this saying. He was a quiet man, but when he spoke, the words were solid, built to last. He'd find stray dogs near the job sites sometimes. Scared, skinny things that would flinch if you moved too fast. I'd watch him, how he'd just sit down on the ground, a little ways off, and not look at them. He'd just be there. Patient. Calm. Eventually, the dog would creep closer. He told me once, "You don't break a wild thing to make it trust you, son. You earn it. Slowly. Quietly. You just show up until it knows you're safe." I thought he was talking about dogs. I didn't realize he was giving me the blueprint for everything that mattered. I had forgotten it, mostly. Packed it away with the rest of the man I used to be. Until she knocked on my door. Clara. The tenant in 5B. The woman I only knew from her work orders. Leaky faucet. Kitchen. Radiator making clanking noise. She was quiet, kept to herself. I'd see her in the hallway sometimes, carrying groceries, her head down. She always seemed to be braced for a blow, even when the world was calm. I thought she was fragile. I had never been more wrong about anything in my life. That night, the rain was beating against the high, small windows of my apartment. The knock was frantic.
Urgent.
I opened the door and there she was. Soaked. Shaking. I need your help, she said, her voice a ragged whisper. Okay, I said. What's broken? It was my standard response. My world was divided into two categories: broken and not broken. She shook her head, a wild, desperate motion. Everything, she breathed. They're here. The social worker. And Julian. They're upstairs. In my apartment. A surprise visit. I didn't know the names. I didn't know the story. But I knew fear when I saw it. It was the same look the stray dogs had. Cornered. I need you, she said, and her eyes locked on mine. I need you to be my husband. The words hung in the damp air. Insane. Impossible. The man I was supposed to be, the man my father raised, was buried under 10 years of dust and grief. But in that moment, some small part of him stirred. The part that sees a cornered thing and doesn't try to break it. I didn't ask questions. I didn't hesitate. I just heard the echo of my father's voice. You just show up. Okay, I said, and I followed her up the stairs into the lie. Her apartment was brighter than I expected. Filled with art, half-finished canvases leaning against the walls. And standing in the middle of the living room were two people. A woman with a clipboard and a weary, professional smile. And a man. A man in a suit so sharp it could cut you, with a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. This had to be Julian. Clara, darling, he said, his voice smooth as poison. We were getting worried. Who's your friend? Clara's hand found mine. It was ice cold. This is Leo, she said, her voice shaking only a little. My husband. The silence that followed was heavy. The woman with the clipboard looked from me to Clara, her expression unreadable. Julian's smile tightened at the edges. Husband? He said, a note of cruel amusement in his voice. That's new. You work fast, Clara. I didn't say anything. I just stood there, my hand holding hers, a solid, silent presence. I was good at being silent. I was good at being solid. I let him talk. I let him spin his web of condescension. I just held her hand and waited. The social worker finally spoke. Mr. Leo, she said, consulting her notes. You're not listed in any of our documentation. We're private people, I said. My voice sounded rusty and used. Julian laughed. Private or secret? Clara has a lot of secrets. He was looking at a closed door at the end of the hallway. I squeezed Clara's hand gently. A signal. I'm here. The visit didn't last long after that. It was a power play, a move designed to rattle her. When they were finally gone, the sound of the front door closing behind them was like a gunshot. Clara collapsed. Not all at once, but in stages. First her shoulders slumped. Then she pulled her hand from mine and wrapped her arms around herself. Then the tears came. Silent, wrenching sobs that shook her whole body. I did what I always did when something was broken. I looked for the source of the problem. I went to the kitchen, filled a glass with water and brought it to her. I didn't touch her. I didn't say, it's okay, because it clearly wasn't. I just stood there, patient, calm. When the sobs subsided, she took the glass, her hands still shaking. Thank you, she whispered. She took a sip and then she started talking. And the whole awful, tangled story came pouring out. The closed door at the end of the hall was her brother's room. Daniel. He was 16, but a severe neurological condition meant he had the cognitive and emotional development of a young child. He was nonverbal, sensitive to light and sound, and needed constant, patient care. Their parents had died years ago. Clara was his everything. His guardian, his nurse, his protector. Julian was her ex-boyfriend. A lawyer who had decided caring for Daniel was a burden on his ambitious lifestyle. And now he was working for their maternal grandfather. A wealthy, powerful man who had never approved of his daughter's life or her children. He wanted to put Daniel in a state-run institution. He was using Julian to build a legal case that Clara was an unstable, unfit guardian. Part of that case was her lack of a support system, her isolation. The world saw a struggling artist in a rundown apartment, unable to hold a steady job, hiding her disabled brother away from the world. The truth was, she worked freelance late into the night on graphic design projects to make ends meet. She did it from home so she could be there for Daniel every single minute of the day. She wasn't hiding him. She was protecting him from a world that was too loud, too bright, too much. The final custody hearing was in 2 months. Julian's surprise visit was a tactic to prove she was alone, to catch her off guard. My sudden appearance as her husband had thrown a wrench in his plans, but it had also created a new, dangerous problem, a lie they would have to maintain. Then came the part that made my stomach clench. "My grandfather offered me money," she said, staring at the floor. $75,000. To sign the papers. To give Daniel to him. She looked up at me, and her eyes were clear now, filled not with tears but with a terrifying resolve. "That money," she said, her voice steady, "it's yours. If you'll do this, if you'll help me, be my husband. Just until the hearing." $75,000. It was more money than I had ever seen in one place. It was life-changing money. It was also blood money. Payment for helping to tear a family apart. I looked at this woman, this stranger who was offering me a fortune to participate in a desperate charade. I thought about the cornered look in her eyes. I thought about my father, sitting patiently on the ground, waiting for a frightened animal to see that he was safe. My dad believed in helping the stray, the cornered thing. If you believe in that too, in showing up when no one else will, you should subscribe. This channel is full of stories about exactly that. Helping people wasn't my thing anymore. I fixed pipes. But Clara wasn't asking me to fix her. She was asking me to be a wall, a shield, something solid for her to stand behind while she fought her war. I could do that. I could be solid. "I don't want your money," I said. She flinched, thinking it was a rejection. "But I'll do it," I added quickly. "I'll help you." Relief washed over her face, so potent it was like watching a light come on. "Why?" she whispered. It was a good question. Why would a man who had walled himself off from the world agree to step into the middle of someone else's chaos? "Julian," I said, the name tasting like rust in my mouth. "I don't like bullies." It was part of the truth. The other part, the part about my father and earning trust, I kept to myself. So the agreement was made. I would be her fake husband. I moved a few things into her apartment the next day. A duffel bag of clothes into the closet. My toothbrush into the holder next to hers in the bathroom. Small things. Domestic things. Things that felt profoundly strange and achingly familiar all at once. I would sleep on the couch. It was a lumpy, uncomfortable thing, but I didn't mind. I had slept in worse places. The first few days were awkward. We were two strangers trying to inhabit the same space, pretending at an intimacy that didn't exist. Then came the invention phase. We had to build our story. For the social worker. For Julian. We sat at her small kitchen table, notebooks open, trying to construct a plausible history. "Where did we meet?" she asked. "The laundry room," I said. "It's believable. You dropped a sock. I picked it up." She almost smiled. "That's terrible. That's from a movie." "Okay. You suggest something." "I complained about the radiator," she said. "You came to fix it. We started talking. It was closer to the truth. Felt safer. We decided on that. We invented our first date, a walk in the park. Our first fight, I left the toilet seat up. Our favorite movie to watch together, she chose a French film I'd never heard of. I chose a classic action movie she'd never seen. We built a life out of lies. And somewhere in the inventing, the strangest thing happened. We stopped inventing. And we started talking. Really talking. She told me about Daniel. Not about his condition, but about him. about how he loved the color yellow, about how he had a silent, rumbling laugh when she tickled him under his chin, about how he loved the smell of cinnamon. I told her about my dad, about the way he could make anything grow, even in the cracked dirt behind our old house, about the calluses on his hands, about the quiet pride in his eyes when I finally learned how to frame a wall properly. We were sharing ghosts, and in sharing them, they seemed a little less heavy. I finally met Daniel a few days later. Clara led me to his room, her hand hovering nervously near my arm. The room was painted a soft, sunny yellow. The curtains were thick, keeping the light gentle. And sitting on the floor, lining up a row of brightly colored blocks, was a boy with Clara's dark hair and wide, serious eyes. He didn't look at me. He just focused on his blocks, his movements precise and deliberate. "Hey, buddy," Clara said softly. "This is Leo. He's a friend. He's going to be staying with us for a while." Daniel didn't respond. He just continued his work. I didn't try to talk to him. I didn't push. I just sat down on the floor, a few feet away, and watched him. I remembered my father. You just show up until it knows you're safe. So that's what I did. Every day, I'd spend a little time in Daniel's room. I wouldn't say much. Sometimes I'd bring in a tool I was cleaning, a piece of brass I was polishing, and just work quietly in the corner. I became a piece of the furniture. A quiet, steady presence. The moment it all changed for me happened about 2 weeks in. Julian had called, another power move, informing Clara that the social worker would be making a scheduled visit the next day. Clara was a wreck. She spent the whole night cleaning an already spotless apartment, her movements jerky with anxiety. That afternoon, Daniel had a difficult episode. Something had overstimulated him. A car alarm from the street below, maybe. He started making a low, distressed sound, rocking back and forth, his hands over his ears. I was in the living room, tightening a loose hinge on a cabinet door. I heard the noise and my first instinct was to go to him to try and fix it. But I stopped myself. This wasn't a hinge. I watched as Clara went to him. She didn't rush. She didn't grab him. She knelt down in front of him and started to sing. It was a simple, quiet lullaby. Her voice was soft, a little off-key, but it was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. She sang and slowly, so slowly Daniel's rocking began to subside. He lowered his hands from his ears. He leaned forward and rested his forehead against hers. She just kept singing, stroking his back, her movements calm and sure. In that moment I saw her. Not the nervous, frightened woman from my hallway. Not the tired, struggling tenant from 5B. I saw a warrior. I saw a woman made of pure, unyielding love. The world called her unstable. Julian called her unfit. They were fools. She was the most stable thing in that boy's entire universe. She was his anchor. And right then, in that quiet, sun-dusted living room, something shifted inside me. This stopped being a favor. It stopped being a deal. It stopped being about a bully I didn't like. This became about her. About them. About protecting this small, fierce, beautiful family at all costs. I wasn't pretending anymore. The social worker's visit went smoothly. I was there, a quiet presence in the kitchen, making coffee. Clara was calmer this time. Stronger. When the social worker asked about me, Clara just smiled a small, genuine smile. "Leo's the calm one," she said. "He keeps us grounded." It was part of the lie, but it felt like the truest thing anyone had ever said about me. Julian didn't like it. We knew he wouldn't. A week later, he showed up at the door, unannounced, holding a bottle of expensive wine. "I thought I'd take my old friend and her new husband to dinner," he said, his smile dripping with insincerity. "We were just about to eat," Clara said, her hand tightening on the doorknob. "Perfect," he said, pushing his way inside. "I'll join you." It was a direct challenge. A test. We were having stew, a simple, hearty meal I had made. Julian looked at the humble bowls on the table with disdain. He sat down, dominating the small space, and began his interrogation, cloaked in polite dinner conversation. He asked about my work, his tone implying that being a superintendent was barely a step above being unemployed. He asked about our wedding, his voice laced with disbelief. He peppered us with questions about our past, trying to catch us in a lie. I let Clara do most of the talking. She was brilliant, weaving our invented stories with threads of real emotion. I just sat beside her, a quiet counterpoint to Julian's aggressive charisma. When he asked me directly how a man like me could have possibly won over a woman like Clara, I didn't rise to the bait. I just looked at her. Then I looked back at him. "I listen," I said. It wasn't the answer he wanted. It disarmed him. He couldn't mock it. He couldn't twist it. It was a simple, undeniable truth. During the entire meal, I just supported her. A hand on her back as she got up to get bread. Topping up her water glass. Laughing quietly at the right parts of her stories. We were a team. A quiet, domestic unit that his loud, expensive confidence couldn't seem to penetrate. He left angry, the expensive wine untouched on the counter. That night, after Daniel was asleep, we were cleaning up the kitchen. "You were good tonight," she said quietly. "So were you," I replied. We stood there for a moment, the silence comfortable, the air thick with things unsaid. She reached out and touched my hand where it rested on the counter. "Thank you, Leo," she said. Her touch was like a spark on a dead wire. Something flickered to life inside me for the first time in a decade. And it scared me to death. The weeks leading up to the hearing were a blur of quiet domesticity. We fell into a rhythm. I'd make breakfast. She'd work while I spent time with Daniel. We'd have dinner together. Felt real. Too real. I was sleeping on the couch, but more and more I felt like I was living a life that wasn't mine. A life I didn't deserve. A life that had an expiration date. The day of the hearing arrived, cold and gray. Clara was dressed in a simple, dark dress. She looked small and vulnerable, but her eyes held that warrior's light I had come to recognize. I wore my only suit, the one I'd worn to my father's funeral. Felt both wrong and right at the same time. The courtroom was a sterile, intimidating place. Wood-paneled walls and fluorescent lights. Julian was in his element, charming and confident. He presented his case first. It was a masterpiece of cruelty, twisting every act of Clara's love and protection into a sign of instability. He showed bank statements with her irregular freelance income. He showed photos of her, taken from a distance, where she looked tired and overwhelmed. He called her a drifter, a failed artist, someone incapable of providing a stable home. He painted a picture of Daniel as a prisoner in his own home, isolated from the world by his unstable sister. I watched Clara as he spoke. She didn't cry. She didn't react. She just sat there, her back straight, absorbing every poisoned word. Then it was her turn. Her lawyer did his best, but he couldn't convey the truth of her life. He couldn't show the judge the lullabies, the patience, the fierce, unending love. Finally, they called me to the stand. Julian handled the cross-examination himself. He smirked as I sat down. "Mr. Leo," he began, his voice dripping with condescension, "the building maintenance man. Tell the court, what can a man of your means possibly offer this child?" He wanted me to talk about money. He wanted me to get angry. He wanted to paint me as another unstable element in Clara's chaotic life. I took a breath. I looked at the judge, a woman with tired but intelligent eyes. Then I looked at Clara, and I decided to tell the truth. Not our invented truth. The real one. "You're right," I said to Julian, my voice quiet but clear in the silent room. "I don't have a lot of money. I can't offer Daniel trust funds or private schools." Julian's smirk widened. "What I can offer," I continued, turning back to the judge, is what I've seen. I've seen Clara spend 2 hours patiently helping Daniel learn to tie his own shoes, celebrating like he'd won a marathon when he finally got it. I've seen her stay up all night finishing a design project so she could afford a special sensory toy that helps keep him calm. I paused, remembering that afternoon. I've heard her sing him to sleep when he's scared of the thunder. I've seen her create a world for him that is safe and gentle and full of love. You talk about stability. Stability isn't a bank account. It's a promise. It's showing up every day, even when it's hard. It's being the person who stays. I looked directly at Julian. The smirk was gone from his face. And then I remembered my father's words, as clear as if he were standing right next to me. You can't break someone's spirit and call it helping, I said, my voice ringing with a conviction I didn't know I possessed. You have to earn their trust. Clara has earned her brother's trust. She's earned mine. The room was utterly still. My testimony had cracked Julian's polished narrative wide open. He had portrayed Clara as a weak, failing woman. I had shown them the warrior. The judge looked from me to Clara, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of understanding, of empathy, in her eyes. Julian had no more questions. The judge delivered her ruling an hour later. Custody was granted to Clara, solely and completely. In her summary, she cited the clear and profound bond between Clara and her brother, and she specifically mentioned my testimony as a key factor in understanding the robust and dedicated support system Clara had built for him. It was over. We had won. The walk back to the apartment was silent. The adrenaline had worn off, leaving a hollow, uncertain space behind. The pretense was over. The deal was done. What were we now? Back in the apartment, the reality of it hit me. I didn't live here. I lived in the basement. I started to gather my things, the duffel bag, the toothbrush. Each item felt like a stone in my gut. Clara watched me, her arms wrapped around herself. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice small. "I'm going home," I said. "The agreement is over." "I don't want you to go back to the basement," she whispered. I stopped, my hand on the doorknob. I turned to face her. I had to say it. I had to tell her the one truth that mattered more than all the others. "This wasn't pretend for me, Clara," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Not for a long time." Tears welled in her eyes. "Me neither," she breathed. And in that moment the lie ended. And our life began. At 1 month, we were still figuring it out, navigating the awkward, beautiful space between pretend and real. At 6 months, Daniel, who had slowly started to let me into his world, said my name for the first time. Just once. Leo, it was the greatest sound I had ever heard. At 1 year, I came home from work to find Clara in the living room, staring at a large, blank canvas propped against the wall. She had bought paints. She was finally painting for herself again. At 2 years, I took her to the park where we had invented our first date. I didn't have a fancy diamond. That wasn't us. I had a ring I'd made in my workshop. It was a simple steel band, polished until it shone like silver, made from the locknut of an old, beautiful machine. I told her it was the part that held everything together. I asked her to make it official, to be my wife for real forever. She said yes. I stood in that courtroom thinking I was saving her. The quiet, competent man, the steady hand, protecting the misunderstood woman from the bullies of the world. I thought I was the hero of the story. I was wrong. I was the one who was broken. A ghost in a basement. A man who had switched himself off. I was just fixing things because I couldn't fix the one thing that mattered, the day I lost my dad. I was the one who was lost. Clara, she didn't need a hero. She was already a warrior. She just needed someone to see her, to stand beside her and bear witness to her strength. And in seeing her, really seeing her, she brought me back to life. She opened the door to her world, and in doing so, she unlocked the door to my own heart, a door that had been rusted shut for a decade. She didn't need saving. She was the one who saved me. The world is full of people like Clara. People who are carrying burdens you can't see. People whose strength is quiet, whose battles are fought in silent rooms, whose love is a fierce, private thing. They are so often misunderstood, written off, judged by a world that only values the loud and the shiny. Real love, real connection, it isn't about grand gestures. It's about the choice to see past the story everyone else is telling. It's about seeing the truth of a person and choosing to stand with them. Have you ever had someone see the real you when no one else did? Tell me about it in the comments below. I read them all, so let me know where you're watching from. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? If a desperate stranger knocked on your door in the middle of a storm, asking for the impossible, would you have opened it? My father taught me that you don't break a wild thing to make it trust you. You earn it by showing up quietly until it knows you're safe. I thought I was doing that for her and her brother. But all along she was doing it for me too. She showed up at my door, a scared and cornered stray. And in letting me protect her, she made me feel safe for the first time in 10 years. My name is Leo. And that is the story of how my wife and I invented a marriage so true, it had to become real. This channel is for everyone who believes love isn't about finding a perfect person, but about seeing an imperfect person perfectly. If that's you, tap that like button. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next story. And turn on that notification bell, because you never know when a reason to believe will find you. Stay steady.